the general fund, we are in line with those estimates. I will say, as we will get the final June report to you again and approved here in the meeting in July on the 17th there. But we did finish bottom line cash about $152,000 in our May forecast updates. So we're finishing in line with where we kind of estimated in the 5-year forecast. So a little difference between the different lines there, but just kind of how we finished the year out. So that's good news in that sense. With final appropriations, we do have those tonight for FY23. We also have approval of the 24. This is our permanent appropriations. And the reason we call them permanent, some districts will do what's called a temporary budget, and then we'll come back with a permanent one to kind of I think they'd have it in by October, believe. But we start the year as this. But as you go along, things change throughout the year, whether it be, most of the time, as you've seen, it's new grants that we get in or grant allocations. When ODE's out there, we'll change that around, and so we have to appropriate accordingly to how that happens. So you will see that in there. If you look in the executive content, you will see our building department budget summary. It kind of reflects in there the differences just in the budgeting numbers between 23 and 24. There are some, you'll see some bigger items that we have special notes on in there. For example, one of the ones is, and we've talked about this before, is the 6th and 9th grade Chromebooks purchases. We had previously taken out of ESSER funds, and now we are back in the general fund for that aspect. The kind of funny thing is it looks a little different if you were looking at the 5-year forecast compared with kind of this is we actually, our 5-year forecast is kind of what we call an accounting world cash basis. But we have to we purchase and the Chromebooks or get ready so they're delivered by the time school starts in the fall for the previous year. So we have to have it appropriated and ready to go, even though we won't spend the money to actually FY25. So that's a little difference from this aspect that we have to appropriate it next year, but we really won't spend it until 25. And it's reflected in our forecast. We won't spend it until 25. There's some other things in there. Easy IT, which was approved here late in FY23, helps out in the operations category with IT and different other things. We do have some new English immersion program and EL curriculum to align with our new phonics curriculum. Some stuff that had to be purchased this next coming year. And there's some other stuff falling out of ESSER, such as Centero and our OSU social worker agreement stuff. So that's when they actually provide. So with that, so the different things there that'll be falling out of ESSER as we go forward with that. So anyways, that's kind of FY24. And then if you look in that document, you can see the building budget allocation. Also, how we do that based off of estimated enrollment that we have. And then one thing we always like to point out, there is some special categories we do that are weighted, whether it be special ed, EL, or different other things that, depending on the building, have available to them. So that is all in here, and along with the departmental budgets and their actual individual account codes. So if you want to look at the long individual account codes in each individual lines, they are in here from a budget perspective. We have year-end cash advances, as we cannot finish the year at a negative in any fund. So what we do is temporarily, at the end of the year, advance monies of these funds and then advance it right back. Two of them you'll see it at the top there. One is Jerome Tournament and Jerome Baseball. It's just we're waiting for the revenue to come in that's associated with that. And so once we get reimbursed and get back for that, then we will, those negatives will go away. And then we also have, which is mostly the advance it has, and it's been this way in the past, is due to our federal grants. First of all, we have to, believe it was June 13th this year is our last our reimbursement request for funds spent. And then also, we also have some purchase orders out there too, in that essence that we can't have the negative unencumbered balance. So hence the advance is over, that then again will advance right back with that. And one thing too is we could request money in advance, but it has to technically be spent within 5 days. So we do not want to, we don't know exactly when different things are going to be spent from a federal standpoint from ODD. Sorry, I jumped real quick over there. So this is why we have those bigger advances we have to do in those grant funds. And then normal course of business, we have a couple student activity purpose clause, and then a approval of a transfer. This is the Science Olympiad Student Activity Fund to the Principals Funds over in Griselle. I believe this is because it's not been an active fund, so we are moving those monies. And then we have a donation this evening as part of convocation expenses, different T-shirts and different other things like that. We have for opening convocation, Spear Mechanical donated some funds to cover those expenses, so we appreciate that. So, any questions on anything on the treasurer's action items?
There being none, is there a motion to pass items 3B through 3I?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. Questions or comments? Do you have anything, Diana?
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I noticed you were looking, so I didn't
no.
want to call it.
Can't decide glasses on, glasses off, because I can't read any of it. But
It's a little small, I apologize.
just one note I made to myself, Brian, is item 507, the ESSER funds that remain unencumbered. It's 21%. I just want to be clear on that. That must be spent on learning loss, correct?
Learning loss has to be a component of it. It's 20% of that allocation and stuff like that. So, and along with some of the other reasons that we had, like for example, Chromebooks wasn't allowable purchased with that. Mental health services, so our Ohio State social work program and different stuff like that is available to do that for. So, but yes, learning loss has to be a component, at least 20% of the component. It can be more than that. And so our phonics program is the biggest, one of the biggest things we have left as we continue to implement that.
Thank you.
And one more thing with that too, it has to be spent by next September of 24.
And kudos to Mr. Kern and his staff for both getting this together as we wrapped up a school year, but also with those ESSER funds. At first, there was no accountability. They were just throwing money at school districts. And now the accountability for money that's been spent back to the beginning of the pandemic and moving forward has really ratcheted up. So we get emails weekly, if not more, from the Department of Education making sure that those funds were spent in appropriate ways. And there are districts across the state and the country that are having to find money to pay back things that they did that were spent under pretenses in places that they shouldn't have been. So if you inappropriately spent the funds, you actually have to now go back and take general fund dollars and reimburse that.
And for example, what he's talking about too, like when we do, I call cash requests, we get for reimbursement of what funds we already spent, we have to actually, before you just send, here's how much we spent, and they kind of just pretty much give it to you. But periodically they will check. We have to send all the backup required for certain expenditures. Usually it's the typical of the bigger ones, but we'll send all the backup for those required. They've done desk audits. They've ratcheted up those not only with ESSER funds, but with our, as Lori and Chris and everyone knows, and they ratcheted up on our regular, for example, IDEA funds, which is special ed and different other things, or Title I. So they really ratcheted that. And then also, as we get into the fall here too, then our external auditors will come in too from that example. And that's usually been what they call a major program. So they'll do a little additional testing according with it too.
Anything else? We had a motion by Scott, second by Diana. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Public participation, we have no one signed up for this evening. Reports and action items from the superintendent's office.
I would like to invite Mrs. Jessica Sullivan up to the podium. Jessica is our data guru, leads all of our testing services, does a phenomenal job. And as we clarify how we use all of the different assessments, I thought it important that Jessica come and share with you an update on where we are on our testing from the 22-23 school year. So take it away.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Dr. Marshausen, Mr. Kern, President Valentine, and members of the board. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm excited to show our MAP data. I'll be focusing on our MAP growth and achievement data over the last several years. And before I get started into the data, I do want to take a second just to level set a little bit about what the MAP assessment is. This is a nationally normed assessment that measures growth over time. And so we have been giving it in our district since the 2015-2016 school year. We started this rollout or implementation in math first and then added reading. You'll see our long-term trend data in just a couple slides. But we give this 3 times a year to students in grades 1 through 8. In math and reading now. And so what this does, it allows at the district level for us to monitor achievement, nationally normed achievement, and allows us to measure growth of all students. At the teacher level, it gives teachers an instructional tool to dig into their student assessment data to understand where they're ready to learn. All right, so I wanted to start big picture. This is focusing only on our 22-23 school year. So our most recent data, and it's combining all of our students in grades 1 through 8 and how they performed on the MAP assessment. So you'll see on the top left chart, it's looking at the median student achievement data. So overall, we were at the 70th percentile for achievement. National norm is 50th percentile. So we are, in NWA's terms, moderately above average for achievement. So our students are exceeding the achievement norms nationally in both math and reading. You can see slightly there's a higher achievement percentile in math compared to reading. It's a difference of, I believe, just 1 percentile. So it's very minimal discrepancy between math and reading. So that's the left-hand side of the chart. The right 3 bars is looking at the growth of our students. And this is where it does become a little bit more confusing, because when we're looking at growth with NWA norms, they are projecting 50% of your students meet their growth norms. So when we think, a lot of times of 50%, we think that's not passing. With national growth norms, the goal is 50%. And so we can see our median student growth with math and reading combined was 57th percentile as a district last year. So that is a celebration. I do just want to continue to reiterate that the norm is 50th percentile for growth. We did not see a discrepancy in our data between math and reading for growth as well. The bottom part of this slide is looking at our student population. This will not come to a surprise to probably most of you in this room that we are not a nationally normed district. We have high achieving students, and we have students who are growing at a very fast rate. So overall, 70% of our students who took this assessment are in the top two achievement quartiles for achievement. So that means that they're at the 50th percentile and above. So we would expect to see 50% of our students for a nationally average school, and we have a much higher percentage of students who are achieving at a higher rate. So I bring that up because in a couple slides, you're going to see this data really, I break it down to, are we growing students at each achievement group level at the same rate? All right, so I will start with MAP growth reading. These slides, there'll be 4 for reading, and then you'll see the same slides with math data. So this first one is looking at an 8-year reading overview. It covers 8 years, but it has 7 data points because we did not test the spring of 2020 because our students were remote at that time. And so we do have 7 data points on here rather than 8. As I mentioned earlier, we rolled out reading a little bit differently than we rolled out math. We started later in grade 1, and we have had different practices in grade 2 because of NWA has 2 assessment options for second grade students, which is the K2 assessment and then the 2-5 assessment. And so NWA, which is the MAP assessment, who researches the MAP assessment, they allow districts to determine what assessment best fits their needs. And as we transition to assessing our second grade students, we started with the K2 band, which we saw inflated some of our data because it provided audio support for a reading assessment, and it did not provide as much stretch above grade level standards. And so we looked at that result, and then we transitioned to the 2-5 assessment, and we also realized that might not be a one-size-fits-all. And so for the second year now, we are transitioning students in the middle of the year when they should become a little bit more of an independent reader. So we don't have, this slide is focusing on long-term trend data. We do not have that in first grade because we started that assessment in 2021. And in second grade, we do not have long-term with a consistent measure. Overall, you can see that we have consistently achieved higher than the national norm, which is, again, the 50th percentile. And we see a dip, the pandemic, we do see a dip in our data from after the pandemic, but we see some gains as well. And you'll really see our gains in our growth data on the next slide. So overall, we are seeing our students are maintaining high performance on the MAP assessment in reading. All right, so the last slide looked at achievement. This slide is going to look at our growth. So are we growing students where they came in? Are we growing them 1 year's worth of growth? And the yellow line is our most recent data from the 22-23 school year. So we see significant gains in our reading data for students grades 1 through 8. This is only looking at the last 3 years, so post-pandemic. I included grade 1 in here because we have 3 years of data. I went ahead and included second grade in here because this is looking at individual growth goals and our students meeting that. So we see some gains here. The highest growth has been in our primary grades. We do think 95 phonics is impacting our data in a positive way. We see some gains in our 6th through 8th grade as well, and I think it's just part of getting back to a normal school experience as well. Students are recovering.
On that slide. On that slide, is there anything that we specifically attribute with the dip with 3 to 4? As far as the grades?
as far as the amount of students meeting the growth goals. No, it looks significant compared to our other grades. But when we take a step back and we look at where we're supposed to be, we're there. We're meeting it in every single grade level. You'll see similar data in math as well. We're at that 50%. I do think like 95 Phonics was rolled out K-3 this year. I'm really excited to stand up here a year from today and see what our 4th and 5th grade looks like as we continue to push that resource. But no, I don't know that there's one thing that pinpoints that, but it's still strong data above the national norm. So, This one gets in the weeds a little bit, but it is one of my favorite ways to look at data because it shows our student population, how our students are coming in the fall. So the left-hand chart is looking at how students performed in the fall assessment last year for reading. And it's the student population per decile. So it's taking the achievement percentiles and putting them into 10 equal achievement groups. Our population is not a national average school. We would anticipate about 10% of our students falling in each achievement group, and you can see for reading that our highest group is at the 80th percentile, and then our next highest is at the 90th percentile. So we have the highest achieving deciles as our largest student population. And the reason I like to look at this is to ensure that we are breaking our data apart to make sure our data is not being inflated with high achieving students or students who are receiving intense intervention and starting to close that gap. And so by looking at this data as a district, we can see that we are growing each group of students. Regardless where they're coming in at in the fall, we are meeting that national norm, which is a big celebration. We can see that our students who are coming in below the national norm, we are starting to close that gap. They're outgrowing our higher percentiles, and we hope to see that continue and see our student population in those lower deciles levels decrease as this continues to increase in growth. Any questions on this chart? I know this one gets in the weeds a little bit. Okay. All right, this is my last reading one. And again, this is breaking the data apart. We have not looked at school level data on these slides tonight. This chart is breaking our school level data. So again, focusing on reading, how are our buildings performing? And so it's looking at achievement and growth. The horizontal line is looking at how we are growing our students. Our buildings meeting that growth expectation of 50% or 50th percentile. And the vertical line is looking at achievement. So are we at or above the national norm for achievement? You can see here that 89.5% of our buildings, this is looking at elementary and middle school, are at the high achievement and high growth. So they're high achieving in the fall, and they're maintaining that, and they're meeting and growing throughout the year. We have one building who is in the high achievement, low growth, and we have one building that's low achievement and high growth, and then we did not have any buildings fall in that low achievement, low growth. And so what we hope to see as we continue to work with our data is that we get everyone in that high achievement, high growth area, and we're very close to that. All right, I'm going to flip to math if you guys are ready. And everything will look very similar. However, you will see some first grade math data on here because we have that long-term trend data with math. We just do not have it with reading. And so for first grade, we did start that back in 2015, 2016. So again, you can quickly see on this chart that we are every single grade level is above achievement norms, which is the 50th percentile. So we see some gains again in our middle school math data, but overall, our students are out achieving national norms. And again, the math second grade is eliminated or excluded for the same reason. We do not have a consistent measure as we have transitioned to differentiating when we transition our students to the next assessment.
Could I just ask a question on
Yes,
on that
of course.
slide? So grades 3 through 5 look a little concerning. And I would say grade 8 looks a little concerning also. So can you just, I know you're going to get more into the data, but if you could speak to why you think those trends are, I would say heading in the wrong direction, just looking at it from here.
I think there's a little bit of variance in just with this is looking at grade level, not a group of students. We're not tracking the student year after year. And we know that every student has a different, every cohort looks and feels a little different. And so if I disaggregated this data based on cohort of students rather than grade level, we might see a little bit of a shift of consistency or maybe even an upward trend. But just looking at grade level trends, it does look a little bit more drastic. I actually mentioned this earlier. It looks a little bit more drastic based on the scale on the left-hand side of the chart. But overall, the shift between grades 1 through 8 from the spring of 16 to the spring of 23 as a district was about 2 percentiles. And so we do expect to see some shift from year to year in students, but it's not a significant decline. And I can give you the raw numbers a little bit more. I think it looks slightly more drastic on this chart than it actually is. It's about an average of 2 percentiles from the spring of 16 to the spring of 23 as a district. We did see a larger decline in 5th grade, like you mentioned. So I can't speak to the math implementation as far as the curriculum implications, but in a couple slides, you're going to see where we're moving with all of this. The MAP growth data looks slightly different than what our reading did. Again, the yellow line is our most recent data. I do want to start off by saying we have met the growth goal nationally of 50% of students meeting their growth goal. So where we see the dip from the previous year, that's what Diana just highlighted as well with achievement. So we are still growing our students at the rate we're expected to, and we plan to continue to dig into the decline in math. But our students are still achieving, and you'll see that on the decile chart. That's part of the reason why I put that up here on the next slide, that we're still growing students in each achievement level. But overall, we're above the growth norms, but we're not seeing the same trend that we saw in reading.
Jessica, can you speak to student placement in math at above grade level places and how that's reflected in this data?
Yes, so our students are still, where we would see that impacting our data is our 8th grade students who are traveling to the high school for math courses. So anyone that's above geometry would be traveling to our 3 high schools for a math course. Of course, we have students who will take other math options. So if they're outside of geometry in the middle schools, they're not included in this assessment data, which could be impacting our 8th grade data as well. Our 5th grade students who take math 5, 6 are included in the 5th grade data, just even though that they're in an accelerated course. Yep. All right. So this one is the deciles, and again, just to level set, we would expect nationally about 10% of your population to fall within each achievement group. Our math data is, our math achievement data is even higher than our reading data was, with our highest student population being in the 90th percentile or higher. And so, again, you can see on the right-hand side that we are growing each group of students. So each group of students is meeting that growth expectation when you disaggregate the data a little bit more. Any questions on that? And here is what we call the quadrant chart that you saw for reading. This is looking at how our schools, like I said, how our schools are growing and are they maintaining their high achievement. And so 84.2% of our schools for math fell in the high achievement, high growth quadrant, which is the upper right-hand side, with 10.5 falling in high achievement, low growth, and 5.3% falling in low achievement, high growth. So you can see the closer they are to the 50th percentile line, that is where the national expectation is. So although we have 2 students in that high achievement, low growth, they are just right under that line. So we're proud of all the work the schools are doing with this data.
Is there any similarity with this from the reading standpoint and where schools fell to how it looks with math? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm articulating
Like
that.
the same schools?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, there is. Yes, I don't have the schools in front of me, but it was similar schools, especially for the low achievement, high growth. We see our students moving at the same rate. So with both math and reading, we didn't see any schools overall in that low achievement, low growth, which is a huge accomplishment. And although we do have, I think, 2 schools up here that fall in that high achievement, low growth, we are very proud of how they're continuing to grow students who are coming in high. We're continuing to push them. So this is a celebration for us. And then I just wanted to highlight some of the implications for instruction, some focuses we'll be working on as an academic team and with our instructional leaders in the building as well moving forward. So we always dig into this data, and we'll continue to dig into the data. We're excited to see the impact that 95 Phonics has. We saw some gains with growth in literacy or in the reading. We know it takes time to roll out new curricular resources. So as we continue to transition to that and we implement in grades 4 and 5, we're excited to see what that looks like. Any additional questions?
So for a student to be included in the data, is there a time requirement that they need to be with us
That's a great
prior
question.
to the test?
Yes, and so they would need to be here in the fall and the spring. And so in order for us to get the national norming data, they have to participate in both windows. But if they, as long as they are here during that window, they're included. There's no other like exclusions based on like how long you've been in the country or anything like that, which we see sometimes with ODE. We're looking at all students who have been here.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification purposes, and I think those of us on this side of the table throw these terms around, can you explain the difference between a norm reference test and a criterion reference test?
Yeah. So with the national norm assessment map, we are looking at how students are comparing, how they compare versus, okay, I'm failing here. So it's looking at their data points. So what NWA does about every 5 years is they take a sample of assessments and they norm it. So they find national averages. And so that gives us benchmarks against other districts nationally. We can compare, so we're not comparing Indian Run to Old Sawmill. We're comparing how are we moving at the same rate nationally? What's the national expectation? Or criteria, we're looking at more grade level based assessment. The great thing about MAP, and I think I kind of skipped over this on the second slide when I was talking about it, is that it's an adaptive assessment. And by that I mean every time a student answers a question, if they get it right, it's going to become more challenging. If they get it wrong, it's going to be less challenging for the student. And so it's really meeting the student where they're at. And when it's nationally normed, the data set is so large that they can determine a student who starts at this specific scale nationally should grow here by the end of the year based on all their data. So they update it about every 5 years. We did see a switch in 2020, but the most common question I get was, did that include pandemic data? It did not. The study happened in 2015 to 2018 data, so it did not include any of that, and they'll start another round here shortly.
And when we look at those indexed students who are in the 90th percentile, in order for them to meet their growth goals, they have to grow based on where they start to where they end the year, and it's harder for them to meet those growth goals. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And so it's finding the balance. So if we go back here in a second and we see like math, our students, this clearly indicates our students are high achieving in math. And what teachers are trying, or what we're working with teachers on, is how do we find the balance? How do we continue enriching and pushing our students without just moving them forward? You know, the subject acceleration. So how are we finding the balance to enrich their curriculum? And what we can see from the decile charts, which is why I always try to include these, is that we're meeting all needs. We're growing those students. So if they come in at the 99th percentile, the expectation is they finish the year at the 99th percentile, which is it's amazing to see how many students and how our teachers can adapt, because the person sitting next to them could be at the 2nd percentile. And the expectation is not only do they maintain their placement, but for those students at the 2nd percentile, we want them to get up to the 50th. We know it takes time, and that's what we're seeing in our data, is that we're getting there.
Any additional questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
All right, I get to keep going. Can we get to the next set of slides? There we go. Members of the board, we will on July 4th be hosting our annual parade with student performances, as always. And then at Kaufman High School, we host the concert, fireworks, and events over at Kaufman. The fences are on the way up around the practice lacrosse and baseball fields in the back as we prepare for the fireworks to get placed this weekend. The gates on Tuesday evening will open at 4:30. I believe everyone who got their T-shirts for the parade and their passes for the table, they were distributed today. The 3 musical performances are there, followed by fireworks at 9:45. And thanks to Jeff and his crew, on July 10th, I believe, we'll rip out the Kaufman turf and start the new turf replacement cycle. We know how important our partnership with the City of Dublin is for this annual event, and we are incredibly grateful to the staff and athletic coaches in the fall at Kaufman for their flexibility, knowing we couldn't start this project until after we got the 4th of July done. So they will mobilize, and we will be able to show our community as they come to Kaufman the work that we're doing on the skin project. I'm not stealing your thunder here, am I? Okay. I was watching windows get ripped out today as there's plastic over the windows, getting ready to do the roof. So the community will see their tax dollars at work from the 2018 levy with the exterior skin and window projects at Kaufman, followed by turf. And Jeff assures me this is all going to be done on schedule and under budget. So there we go. Exciting movement and planning going on with our DCS University, which will kick off on August 9th for the first of those DCSU events. The first 3 dates for the fall part of the year, August, September, and November, are finalized. These night evenings will be here from 6 to 8:30. We will make some transitions here. One of the things that I've talked with board members about is having a board meeting that's just a listening meeting at each of these events, so that we as a board can hear directly from our community. This is a business meeting, and at our business meetings, we conduct the business of the board. This past year, we had our community conversations, and board members joined us, and some of them went very well, and some of them were sparsely attended. One of our goals with DCSU is to create a one-stop event multiple times a year that will draw parents and community members and provide all of the information that they're looking for, knowing that not everyone's going to want everything, so that we can create those opportunities for us to engage with our community. So the community coffees, especially the morning community coffees, which were the same 5 people as we did those throughout the year, those coffees will be replaced by a board meeting with a purpose of listening to the community. I think it's important that we maintain our focus and that we, on our agendas, conduct business as business meetings, but also have opportunities to hear from our constituents. As we did this past year, if there is a literacy concern or a safety concern or specific topics that come up during the course of the year, we will, of course, continue to hold those events as needed. Any questions on DCS University? The state budget. If the General Assembly has 2 options by the end of the weekend, they either need to pass a CR, a continuing resolution, or they need to pass a budget, since the state of Ohio will not be able to spend money beginning on July 1st without either. Some of the things that we're hearing regarding the state budget is the Senate's scheduled to meet tomorrow around 11. The House is scheduled to meet slightly following that. Conference committee still needs to get together to vote to agree on a single budget that both houses can vote on. It sounds like we're going to get both a budget and a continuing resolution tomorrow, because they would like to give the governor time to review that budget, which will be thousands of pages, before they pass it and he signs it. So what it sounds like is going to happen is we'll get a continuing resolution and a budget passed by the end of the day tomorrow, and the continuing resolution will give the governor some time before he signs the budget bill. One of the unique things in the state of Ohio is the governor has the opportunity to line item veto portions out of the budget. So the governor will go through, and if there are specific things that he wants to line item out, he will. And then the General Assembly has an opportunity to override each of those independently with a 2/3 vote. So we'll see where that goes. Major things that affect school districts that are part of the budget bill is Senate Bill 1, which reorganizes how education is governed in the state of Ohio. That was rolled into the budget. Universal vouchers were rolled into the budget. School funding is significantly different in the House version and the Senate version, in a magnitude of billions different. So that's all in there. And then there are two main higher education pieces that are in there, portions that were introduced as Senate Bill 83 and Senate Bill 117. It's going to be interesting to see where the trading and process comes out between two very different budgets with both houses controlled by Republicans. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next couple hours, really. The Alliance, which we are a member of, OSBA, OASBO, and BASA, are all engaged in advocacy. One of the challenges we face is we're not all advocating for the same things. So when you look at how those efforts are proceeding to support what's happening for education, there's not always alignment there. Any question on budget issues? Mr. Melody, if you need to leave, I will not be offended.
I'll wait until you're.
Okay.
Yep, it is over.
Okay. School funding. Dr. Schwanke represents us on the Dublin envisioning process. And as we talk about growth in our school district, we're going to have a lot of educating to do with our constituents, because there are an awful lot of people who think, oh, look at all those new houses, you get more money. Or, oh, look at all those new students, you get more money. Mr. Kern, how much % state funded are we?
15.
So we get 15% of a funding formula that's not fully funded, that doesn't capture nearly what we spend per pupil when we get a new student that walks in our doors. Because of House Bill 920, which is going to require School Finance 101 for everyone in our community to understand, we're not getting new tax dollars with all the new construction that we're seeing in our community. And in a district that's 87% salary and benefits, we're in the people business. And we've got the best teachers and administrators in the state. And when we look at where our salary, where our money goes, most of it goes to pay the people. So we're going to have some educating over the next several months to do when we talk about the impact of growth, the revenue versus the expenditures that costs. The city of Dublin intentionally tries to maintain a 60 to 40, 60% residential, 40% commercial industrial, so that for houses they're bringing in the business taxes to support that. Not all of our municipalities have that same approach. Some of them just keep stacking houses up for us. And the assessment, the impact of reassessment, when we look at 32% increases since the last potentially reevaluation, we don't get 32% more money because of that. So although there is a reassessment, we're basically flat funded during the time when those reassessments come. So as we talk about funding and growth in buildings and new elementaries and additions, this is going to be a constant message that we have to hone and perfect. And we've got to layer simplicity over complexity in a way to explain this in a way that's simple for our folks to understand as we talk about finances. Any questions from the board?
Going back to the DCSU really quick, so it's 6 to 8:30. Can you just explain this just slightly? I'm wrapping my head around this. We're going to have a topic. We're getting rid of community coffee.
Okay, so if you think about DCSU as a 2.5-hour conference, where throughout that there will be a schedule that when people walk in, they can choose in one room. We may have a member of Mr. Andrus's team explaining the 504 process. In another location, there may be our students working with some teachers to teach digital citizenship and how to set up your iPhone so you can put parent controls on your iPhone And the kids will be telling parents how they beat those parent controls, because we'll bring in some of our high school kids who can talk about how they get around the things that are on there. In another space, we're going to be teaching R Factor to community members who want to have R Factor. The 7 groups that we lead that are community engagement groups, each of them will meet one time at one DCSU. So I think BAC we're going to invite to the first DCSU, and then we might have PTO presidents at the second DCSU. So at each of those events, there will be an hour where we'll be listening. And it will be one of the things that parents or participants can attend.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Does that make more sense?
It does, it makes more
Think
sense.
about the
Yes.
COSPA conference, and you get
That's
to
what
pick,
I was
and you
thinking,
get to
okay.
pick where you go.
Okay, perfect.
And our goal is, we may have gotten 15, 20 people at some of those things. If we host enough things of interest, are we being more efficient with time, and are we encouraging folks to come to those events?
All right. Scott's got double duty tonight. Go ahead.
So members of the board, thank you for moving the meeting time up to 6 o'clock, but I do have to excuse myself to go to the Tolles Career Tech board meeting that starts at 7, so I will be a few minutes late to that as well. So I'll see you all on the 4th of July. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. We good to move on to item 6?
Yep.
All right, Department of Academics and Student Learning.
Okay, well, Mrs. Sullivan did a fantastic job reporting out on behalf of our department. I did want to add one thing, just in case board members don't know this or our community doesn't. Every parent receives a detailed MAP report emailed to them with their child's results after every administration. And so a parent can track the trends that Mrs. Sullivan talked about. And sometimes parents will panic if they don't see growth every time. But it's normal for a child to have a 76th percentile, then a 71st percentile, then a 78th percentile. So we teachers do a fantastic job talking to parents about what they're seeing in the classroom to complete the picture of a child's learning. So we do communicate all this information at a individual student level. So I want to thank you for that detailed work, Mrs. Sullivan. And I believe that also concludes Mrs. Marple's report. And we will turn it over to Mr. Andres for a few summaries of items on the agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Schwanke. And thanks, everybody, for joining me as I start my presentation tonight. Listen, tonight I'm asking for your approval of 5 different items, all from the student services area. The first 2 items are specifically for students with disabilities that attend St. Bridget of Kildare School, which is located within the boundaries of Dublin City Schools. So people sometimes wonder why a public school district would have anything to do with a non-public school district. And the reason really is pretty simple. It's because the law tells us we have to. We have to be the fiscal agent for certain funds that come through Dublin City Schools or through a school district. So there's lots of different federal and state programs that are out there that non-public schools have access to, but tonight I'm just going to focus on one because they're all a little different, and that is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, federal funds. Every spring, every public school district has the pleasure of consulting with every non-public school district that has a child from their school in that building, which is a lot of different buildings. For IDEA funds, it's simply a school district that's within the boundary. And what we do is we talk about if they want to participate in the federal program and if they have children that would be eligible in that program. So here in Dublin, there is only one school that has eligible students with disabilities, and that's St. Bridget. So if you wonder, why don't you see another non-public on the list for something that we do, it's because they're not within our boundaries. So, for example, if Worthington Christian was eligible and had children, Worthington City Schools would be their fiscal agent. So during the consultation, it's determined which kids are eligible and what they generate what we call a proportionate share. So for IDEA, it is every child identified as a child with a disability at the school, regardless of their home district. So here's an easy example. Suppose a school district had 98 students with disabilities within their district, and there's one non-public, like we have, and that non-public has 2 kids. Of those 2 kids, one resides within the school district and one doesn't. So we've got a total of 100 kids. If the school district was allocated $100,000, the school district would receive $98,000 and the non-public school would receive $2,000, 2% of the allocation. That's their proportionate share. So those 2 schools, the non-public and the public, work together to come up with a plan on how to spend those funds that is similar to what the school district offers. The school district can only provide services through there that are similar to what, for example, what Dublin would do. So it's also not a proportionate share per student. Of those 2 students that generated that $2,000, the needs of the students are what drives the spending for those kids. So it's possible that one of those students might need $1,500 or $1,800, and the other student might need $200 or $500. So after consulting with Kathy O'Reilly, who's the principal at St. Bridget, and Jill Carfagna, she's mostly my contact there, we've agreed that things seem to be working pretty well with the services that are provided there, with Move to Learn for their occupational therapy and speech therapy, and Spirit of Peace counseling for mental health support. These are services that they've had and the board has approved. I think Spirit of Peace we started approving in 2020 and Move to Learn in 2018. I'd also like to just take a moment to touch on the final 3 items. Cindy Schultz, she's the Orton Gillingham Fellow that has helped me and our district create our in-house Orton Gillingham training program. We started working and contracting with Cindy 7 years ago, and she's also continues to be vital in terms of her support with us as we move through and into the science of reading. Cindy Pennington is also an excellent resource here. Cindy works with our staff who have children who have used the MathUC math resource. And for those kids, we don't have too many of them, but for those kids and those intervention specialists, they appreciate her support and coaching to make sure we use that program with fidelity. And finally, Diane Fowler is a new request. Diane actually presented here in Dublin, I think in 2017 or 2018, to our school psychologists to help us do a better job in the evaluation process of English learners, as we possibly suspect when they have a disability. And since she retired and we learned that she was available to help us, in a time where finding school psychologists is very difficult, she's agreed not only to help us with the EL evaluation identification process, but to also help us if we have psychologists that are out on leave or if we just need a little bit of extra help. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions and appreciate your time.
Is there a motion to approve items 7A through 7E?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes. Motion passes 3-0. Operations.
Good evening. I have 2 items for your approval tonight. The first one is we're recommending that the board approve a 3-year agreement with Union County to provide us with SRO for both Depp Elementary and Eversole Middle School. This is a really fair agreement, a true partnership between Jerome County, Union County, and ourselves, where the district only pays 50% for this SRO. The rest of the cost is picked up by Jerome Township and Union County. And this year, we started this program, I think last year was the first year, and this year they're offering us a 3-year agreement, which is nice, and it'll be updated, I think it said, Brian, by December of every year, they'll tell us the cost for the next year, depending on the agreement that the police have with Union County. So this will be a 3-year agreement. And what we have here is the funding for the first year, and then the board's authority to move forward from there. The next item we have, and this is our annual insurance for both property and liability coverage. So this is a mixed bag of information. So the first news is we're asking the board for $909,621, and that is an increase from last year. Mixed bag because bad news is that our property insurance was the main driver of this, which should not be a surprise to anyone who has a home right now or anything else. And our last time we got audited was 2018, and they recently audited all of our buildings. And just on inflation alone and construction replacement costs, that was the main driver. The good news is that our loss ratio, which is the ability for an insurance company to want to have you, and the ability for them to make money and not have is starting to decrease. You know, an average loss ratio for a school district is around 30 to 50%. We were above 90 at one point. We're above 80, and it's starting to decrease every year. So the information that we're giving to our principals and more things about waivers and things we can do to reduce liability has really, really shown progress. So that's going down. So the main driver for this increase is just property value. Any questions?
I just have one question on Union County, the SRO for Union County and liability. Does Union County cover the cost of liability?
Yeah, they
for-
have to, in the agreement, there's an insurance piece about their own folks and what they're responsible for.
Okay, thank you.
All right, is there a motion to approve items 9A and 9B?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Gillis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 3-0.
Thank you.
And HR, standing in tonight.
I am actually thrilled that Mr. Boney isn't here. It is really nice, and we encourage our team to take vacations during the summer months and to be able to rest and rejuvenate with loved ones so that when we ask them to do this work, they are at their best. Our agenda for HR tonight is relatively uneventful. I'd like to thank Mr. Boney and his staff as we get to these end-of-the-year hires. And we have to be more thorough, and we have to be more intentional in the interview process to make sure that we are only putting the very best people in front of our students. And I know that the interview process, the passport process, the work that they've been doing allows us to put high-quality people on this agenda at this time of year. So everything on here is fairly typical, unless you have any questions.
All right, there being none, it's recommended by the superintendent. The board approve items 11A, 11B, and 11C. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 3-0. Reports from communications.
Okay, so we have a slight change going forward. Cassie Dietrich is doing double duty tonight, not only working with Kelly Ram to keep our live stream going, no small task, but Cassie will also be offering us a short update each meeting for community engagement and communications, just to let everyone know what's going on. And Cassie, after this, you'll toss it over to our
Push on social media. We just started with Infinite Campus this week, and so we'll continue to move those communications through and just looking at what needs to happen for a school year-long plan for communications. So United Newsletter just hit mailboxes this weekend. So if you live here in Dublin, you probably saw it in your mailbox. We're super excited about that issue, and we've already gotten a lot of positive feedback. Highlights of that newsletter are a story about a student we have named Sam, who has cancer, who's using technology in the district to attend class, which people have really enjoyed that story. I think it's pulled on some heartstrings. And then we featured our graduating class of 2023, and we have some stellar graduates who are doing really exciting things as they move forward. In August, we're working on a Dub Life story. The Termier family had their 4th generation graduate from Scioto High School this May. And she graduated exactly 100 years after her great-grandmother in 1923. So look for that story in Dub Life magazine in August. It was a really cool one to do, and Keyburn and I had the yearbooks out, and we're looking at old pictures and all that, so it's been pretty neat. We're excited about the 4th of July that's coming up. You guys should have all had your T-shirts and your bands to go and be entertained by Ann Wilson and spend time out in the community. This weekend is also a big weekend for us with alumni. We have our 50-year reunion. So the class of 1973 will be hosted this weekend. And then we also have our all-class reunion on Saturday, which is for anybody who has graduated from Dublin City Schools. So we look forward to having people at that on Saturday night at 1487 Brewery. And then I just recently spent 2 hours of time with the principals. It was my first opportunity since I arrived here in November to really spend time with the principals and help guide them and just even have a conversation, really a two-way conversation with them about what communications looks like here in the district, what best practices we can implement so that their communication with their family is more streamlined and parents are getting the information that they need when they need it, and that it looks nice and it sounds good and it makes sense. So I did that training last week, and I have actually, after that training, some of them requested a follow-up training because they wanted even more information. So we're planning that in July. So I look forward to spending that time with them. So you may have any questions?
I just have one. The meeting with the principals, is it your intention, or do you think that the newsletters will be almost uniform? I mean, is that the goal, to kind of have, realizing the content will be different, but is there a format or something they're going to follow, or is it everybody is individualized for their own school?
Yeah, so we use S'more for e-newsletters to families. The building newsletters will still continue to go out weekly because the principals like that cadence of having something out weekly, and then we'll continue monthly. What I spent time with them on was things like accessibility. So when you have text in an image file, it doesn't translate for our EL families. It's also not accessible by a screen reader if you have someone who is visually impaired looking at that. So I taught them a lot about web accessibility and making sure people are able to actually access this information, because if we're putting it out there but they can't read it, then it's not impactful. And then the other thing we talked about was how to format those newsletters so that they are easier for people to digest. So some of what I've seen as I've looked at newsletters, and not that anybody's doing a poor job, but is that we have a tendency to put a lot of text, very text heavy, and maybe the information isn't organized. So we talked a lot about how newspapers and magazines are organized by categories, and you have consistent categories every week in which you're putting the information so that people can, it's kind of like a consumer behavior science. You think about the way people read things and digest things and take information in. And so trying to be more strategic about how those are laid out and make it easier for people to find the information that is actually applicable to them. Because we try to target our communications as much as we can, but when you're sending a building newsletter for grades 6 through 8, there's still going to be stuff in there that's for 8th grade parents, it's not for 6th. And so thinking about when your audience is receiving that information, the way in which they want to receive it and not necessarily the way in which we speak it internally, just like Dr. Marchhausen mentioned with like the acronyms and the languages that we use. And so really trying to get into the mindset of your audience.
Mrs. Rigby, that was the intent when I asked Cassie to lead this. We have parents who have elementary students, middle school students, and high school students, and their newsletter is completely different. We value that to some extent because a school has a personality, the principal has a personality, they work with different departments. So we don't want to standardize and make everything exactly the same. But we want them to think very carefully about the message and what needs to be in there, how often you repeat things, that sort of thing. So it was one of them, they were very engaged. Our principals want to do a great job communicating. It was very effective training, and I'm grateful for you for leading it. So don't look for a formula. Look for personality, but consistency.
Yeah, I want them to have autonomy to have their own brand on it. But there's, I guess, best practices and guidelines that we are asking them to follow.
You guys may have mentioned this, but is this going to have a quarterly type deal as far as the trainings or communication with them? I wasn't sure if this is a step above what I would say that we've done in the past, or at least in my experience, looking at it from a board member.
We meet with all principals in an operational meeting every month, and Cassie has a standing place on that agenda. So we train according to our needs. I don't know that we will, at this point, the plan is, okay, they've all gotten the 30,000-foot view. And then I told Cassie, okay, now if you see newsletters that aren't doing this, then you go directly to that principal. You go to that school. And we'll continue to revise and look at it. Again, it's that fine line between wanting to communicate consistently and clearly, but not micromanage 25 buildings.
Right.
So
we will have quarterly PD with our social media managers. So that's something we have.
next.
Yeah, we have a social media manager in every building. And so one of the things that I kind of also observed after being here since November is that we assigned people the role, but we didn't necessarily provide the right supports that they needed in order to excel in that role. And so we are working on a plan. Keeber and Grady has really become the social media guru in our department, and we're working on a plan in which they will have opportunities for quarterly PD. There's a little bit of restrictions on what we can require them to because of their whatever's in their stipend, but that option will be there for them to professionally grow as a social media manager in their building. And I had that conversation with the principals, and the principals were very supportive and very on board with that, really shoring up that job description and making sure that they really understand what they need to do. Because if you look at some of our social media, if you've seen our social media out there, some buildings are really excelling at it and others aren't. And so we're trying to bring a level of equity to that.
There's one person who gets every newsletter and sees all of them, and it's Cassie. So when we see those challenges, she'll be able to now kind of go make some suggestions and make sure that we're all in the same space and aligned with the vision that we want.
Yes. All right.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. Wayne Tsai, Assistant Principal at Kaufman High School, to the podium and thank our award-winning students for their patience. And we can't wait to hear about your accomplishments.
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Marchhausen, Mr. Kern. I am honored tonight to present to you guys the Just Right Ohio Tournament Grand Champion team from Dublin Kaufman High School. The team is led by Dr. Steve Krasinski, English teacher at Dublin Kaufman High School, and he's going to talk a little bit about the competition and present the members of the team. Dr. K.
Thank you so much for having us here tonight. These are this year's grand champions, but this team, two of whom are here tonight, have won the state championship 4 straight years. So they have always have a tough road to hoe to accomplish that. Annie and Alyssa, would you take a step forward? Annie and Alyssa were actually part of all 4 state championship teams. So, and we're losing both of them. Can we flunk them on a class or something? Can we hook that up? Thank you so much. But this, so raise your hand, kids, if you are in other clubs, sports. So we have always got to we ask them to make time for this, and I make time for them, but every single one of them does something else. And so if they can't be at our trainings or our work sessions, then they volunteer to do something on the outside. So this competition is creative writing. They have to write on a prompt, 3 in one competition, 3 different sessions. Not only the prompt, but the genre, historical fiction, mystery. They don't know the prompts or the genres ahead of time. So it's not just about being strong and smart and a good writer. They have to understand the audience. They have to understand what's going to stand out. So they all qualified from regionals, which we host. I'm so glad that we host that at Kaufman. And so when we qualify our entire team, we go to states, and then from there, they are all contributing. And that's the one thing I want to emphasize. Every single writer to my right, and 3 who aren't here, their pieces went into the state competition. No offense to the state championships where, everybody's honored, but they were just there. Like everybody to my right, they wrote a piece, and those numbers went into the scoring. So they literally, to the number, contribute to the success. And without any one of them, we probably wouldn't win the states. I don't know if they're going to change the scoring rules for us. This is the power of the pen. And I want to say that to the middle school power of the pen coaches and students. They're setting us up for success. Where are my power of the pen people are to my right? Okay, they're sending us really talented writers. I don't want to say I didn't do anything or anything, but they really are sending us fantastic writers, and I'm able to shape that. But again, it's their commitment. It's all credit goes to them. It really, really does. And so we have Anna and Sophia and Annie and Alyssa and Laura, and I can't see faces. There we go, Shavari. And okay, I'm going to mix up with the sisters, Grace. and Sanjana and Emma and Colleen and Fanethan and Lizzie could not be here tonight. But I truly want to give all credit to the students, and I'm so proud to work with them. I get several of them back, I hope. We're losing a couple of them to college. And again, so proud to work with them. What a neat opportunity. It's not, sports are great, of course, we all love them, but this is such a neat opportunity for them to show off, and not just their abilities, but to do that on the spot, to do that under pressure of time. I hope to see you back next year. Thanks all for having
Dr.
us tonight.
Kaczynski,
Yes.
real quick, for the graduates, and if you don't mind stepping forward and say where you're going and what you're going to study. I'm most interested in knowing what you're going to study. Wow.
So yeah, we got to replace Brown and Oxford on our team. We have a heavy recruiting process involved here. But in all seriousness, I've already started reaching out to the middle schools saying, be part of the team. It's awesome. So thanks for having us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hold for parents for a second. Which camera should we look at? You guys are used to posing on stage with your awards. Come on. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you.
All right, future agenda items?
We'll see everybody next Thursday at 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see a notice coming out from my office about that probably tomorrow. So,
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 3-0.